one thing that attracted me to being a part was the fact that I went through my own
Yeah.
uh, literally addiction recovery experience. And it was groundbreaking for me. It was simultaneously the worst day and the best day of my life.
Yeah.
That's how I can, there's no way I can describe it other than that. It was the sea change, the pinnacle. It was like everything switched on that day. My whole life went upside down and back around and was corrected on that day.
Yeah.
Um, and my question to you I just remember at the time feeling like I was absolutely fine, you know, and and all of a sudden I had no control. All of a sudden I realized I did not, my life was out of my hands
Yeah.
instantly. Um, can you just talk to people, you being a doctor, you being a specialist in this area, um, can you talk to me a little bit about that, like how this works? And first of all, you are in recovery yourself,
I
but
know.
how does it work with people that you counsel and these kind of things? This is because that's the moment everything changes.
Yeah. Sometimes people recognize that things are out of control. Sometimes they have no idea. The way that our brain as addicts works neurologically is that our brain has wired itself to use this behavior that numbs out the trauma, that numbs out the pain, that helps us to sort of feel like we're surviving. Um, and sometimes people are aware that, this is getting out of control. There's something that's not quite working here. I know that was the case for myself. I was in denial for years and years and years, and at some point it was this acceptance of, you know what, I've been trying to pull back on this behavior. I've been trying to stop this behavior, and I can't.
Mm,
And so I need to do something about that. Other people, it's the denial because their brain is saying, if you don't do this, we're going to be overwhelmed. And the
mm,
brain is very good at sort of painting a picture that isn't reality. And so other people's brains are painting that picture that like, no, this is fine, everything's good. And addicts have gotten really good at denying to themselves and to others that there's an issue going on. And one of the very first things that when people come into our program or any solid program for recovery from sex addiction or any addiction for that matter, one of the very first things that we always address is that denial piece
mm,
because, it's so easy for people to have that, no, 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 things are good. I was the same as you. I thought, I'm solid. I'm good. I've got this. I did function pretty well in my addiction,
mm,
but I know how much better I function in recovery, and it's night and day. And no
mm.
matter how well I thought I was functioning when I was wrapped up in my own addictive behaviors and my addictive process, when I was able to loosen that up and let go of it and sort of find a recovery path,
Wow.
my ability to function as a husband, as a father, as a friend, as a therapist, exponentially different.
Well, this is another thing that I want to just describe and ask you about is because when I had a inkling
Yeah.
that something might be wrong, I was told that it did, my sexual addiction didn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
And, the foundation that we're on is really uh, is we're trying to let people know that wait, this is a real thing, but it's very, very hard to do when you have very reputable scientific people saying that this is not a thing at all. Can you address that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, we have been fighting this fight for a long time, and Afar was founded in the late 90s, by Patrick Carnes, who we are always so grateful for,
Mm,
to try to get evidence to say, hey, what we're seeing is an actual thing. And this happens all over the place. You know, the alcoholism wasn't really considered to be a treatable disease until those who were affected by it started to do something about that. And so, there were AA meetings happening, trying to change it and to give people an option other than being locked up and institutionalized and saying, well, we just can't get them to stop drinking, so we're just going to put them in a hospital.
Wow.
The people who were affected stepped in and tried to change it. The same thing is true for gambling. Same thing is true for so many different compulsive behaviors. Sex addiction is the same. There have been 12-step programs, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, have been around since the early 70s.
Hmm. Hmm.
And in the late 90s, we were still trying to convince people that this was a thing, you know. And in the United States, we're still having to fight that battle. The rest of the world has caught on. There's a diagnosis that explores compulsive sexual behavior in the World Health Organization's uh, uh, ICD-11, but we're still fighting it in the United States. And the problem is, there are some pieces about being more intelligent allows you to deny and ignore and manipulate the data more effectively.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there are some researchers, and I don't know anybody who, quite honestly, I would really consider to be legitimate.
Hmm.
There's a number, I shouldn't say a lot. There are some researchers out there that, for their own purposes, are very resistant to acknowledging that compulsive sexuality can be a problem.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but we have an abundance of evidence that sex addiction is a thing. We have an abundance of evidence that shows the neurological changes that happen when someone has a sexual addiction. And we have plenty of evidence that shows how those neurological changes match up with the neurological changes we see with people with other addictive processes, alcohol, drug addiction, gambling addiction, eating disorders. We
Hmm.
have an abundance of evidence that shows that there's withdrawal from pornography addiction, that there are all kinds of compulsive behaviors that go on. We see it all over the place.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think it's important to recognize is that the acknowledgement and the work we're doing to identify sex addiction is not a moral argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not an argument to say looking at porn is bad. Now, I view it, some people really get upset when I say this, but I'll say I view it much like alcohol.
Yeah.
Some people can drink alcohol and it's going to be an addictive process for them and they got to be careful with it. And other people don't run into that same problem. Although you drink enough, you can create that.
Hmm.
Pornography is much the same way. There's some people that are not going to have that issue with it. Putting people's moral concerns about pornography aside, from a purely addictive, compulsive place, some people are not going to have that struggle with it unless they go way over the top with it.
Hmm.
Other people like myself, and I think when we've talked, what you've shared, from day one, pornography had a whole different effect on me.
Yeah.
The hooks that it had on me compared to the hooks it had on my peers, night and day.
Yeah.
And so it's not an issue of this is a behavior that's morally wrong. It's an issue of this is a behavior that has a different hook on some people that becomes out of control extremely quickly and creates all kinds of consequences. And that's true whether it's pornography, masturbation, paying for sex, any number of addictive behaviors out there. It's not about the morality of the behavior. It's
Hmm.
about the addictive quality and process of the behavior. It becomes compulsive. People try to stop and they can't. It becomes preoccupied with it. They have significant consequences and they keep doing it. It escalates over time and they stop and they go through withdrawals. This is not about do we think this is a morally okay sexual behavior? This behavior has become compulsive in an addictive way that is now creating more harm than any good or any relief it could ever offer.
I have bringing up the other kind of what you would call problems in society. I kind of have to go back to smoking. You
Yeah.
know, when you look at, there was a time when the Red Cross would give away medicine, bandages, and cigarettes.
Yep.
And it was and it was actually told that cigarettes were good for you in a small amount, which we have totally understood. Now listen, you still can smoke. No one's out for banning smoking, but you, to me, I think it's just more important that we know the dangers.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's not a moral issue, but if you know the dangers of what can happen, if you can recognize these signs, now you can do something about it. But if you deny any sort of danger, um, I think that it's like walking across live wires and telling people everything's just fine, because uh, again, another thing I wanted to bring up is just when I look at in juxtaposition to smoking and this kind of thing, it's when you look at the lobby that was happening with
Big
Philip
tobacco.
Morris and the tobacco industry. They were putting reports out that it was safe. They were finding doctors that would validate their reports. Do you find this is happening also in this industry? I mean, in what we're talking about in regards to sex addiction, pornography, or these kind of things?
Yeah, mostly where we see that is with the pornography industry. And
Mhm.
I don't know that it's the individual directors or creators of pornography, but the big pornography, conglomerate. Um, they have taken on a role that's very much similar to what Big Tobacco did back in the day.
Mhm.
And they've taken on the role, which is not saying, hey, we're creating a product that many people enjoy using. And for some people, this can be problematic. And so we'll acknowledge that. And, we'll work with people to make sure that they can use this in a healthy and an appropriate way. That's not what they're doing. What they're saying is there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. It is impossible to become addicted to this. And we are actively going to work against any kind of limitation for this. So much so that they were actively pushing back against having, actual good age verification on pornography websites,
Mhm.
um, saying that this is a free speech issue. And I'm like, I'm all for free speech. I'm all for people having access to what they want to have access to as long as appropriate, but we should not be letting kids. And let's face it, kids are so much more technologically savvy than adults are these days.
Right.
There's no way I'm going to be able to set up, I could set up effective boundaries for my kids to prevent them from easily accessing online pornography at no cost.
Yep. Yep.
And so, um, the big pornography industry out there has really sort of taken that stance of there's nothing wrong with it. We shouldn't put any boundaries around it. We don't really need to put accurate age verification on it. Um, and they're acting very much like sort of big tobacco is, not saying, yeah, this is a product and people can choose to use it, and let's help people use it in an appropriate way. And if there's an issue, how do people identify that? It's not
Wow.
what they're doing at all.
Wow. I agree. First of all, listen, if you're 18 and over, you can make your own decisions.
Yeah.
But this is the problem I have is that I don't know anybody anywhere that had a problem with pornography that saw it after 18 years old. I mean, I was 11,
Yeah.
when I was exposed. You know, I've talked, to my own kids, and they were like, "Hey, we were very young when we saw this." And right now, when you look at accessibility with the phones and the different apps, I mean, it's wild. Even what you can see just on Twitter, because Twitter doesn't have any kind of blocking. You can put anything out there on there. And uh, I want to address this right now. I mean, what do you think this is doing to the next generation that is technologically savvy?
Hmm.
happier than their parents. Let's say you do put blocks up on
Yeah.
your computers, but they can find ways to access this through their phones, to there's always, workarounds that they can get to. What do you see happening in this next generation with this kind of issue?
Well, we've been talking for decades, quite honestly, that we have a tsunami of problems coming with sex addiction. When the internet first came out and sexual content was first on there, we saw a marked shift in the people that we were seeing coming into our programs dealing with sex addiction. It went from people who went from their first kind of struggles with compulsive sexual behavior to all out significant problems with major consequences. And that process would usually go over 5, 10, 15 years.
Mm,
And we started seeing that progression happening in as little as 3 to 6 months, or and that was, not uncommon. There's so much evidence that we have that the teenage brain, the adolescent brain, is developing and changing so rapidly, and that when the adolescent and teenage brain is exposed to addictive processes, that it is so much more vulnerable to that becoming an addictive pattern for them. We've seen that with nicotine. We've
mm,
seen that with alcohol.
yeah,
We've seen that with gambling. We're seeing it with pornography and sexual behavior. And pornography is often that gateway into other sexual behaviors. But we see it, and unless we continue to lean into appropriate age verification, and let's not fool ourselves, age verification doesn't mean that no teenager or no adolescent anywhere is ever going to see this.
right,
We're not saying that it's going to be perfect,
right.
but let's at least make it you know, difficult or challenging or less easy. Because right now it's check a box to say that you're this age.
Hmm.
Okay, what 16-year-old or 15-year-old that wants to see porn is going to say no?
Hmm. Yep.
So let's at least make it more difficult because without that, we are literally giving adolescents and teenagers unfettered access to a product that has the potential to be addictive, and it's wiring their brains to be addicted to this, and we are setting up the whole next generation to have all kinds of compulsive problems around sexuality, which doesn't only just lead to compulsive sexuality, it also leads to issues with relationships, issues with sexual functioning, issues with ideas about what a sexual relationship entails, what healthy sexuality entails.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there are so many people that I work with that have missed the idea that sex at its core is really about intimacy and connection with another person.
Mm,
And when they get the addictive process going on, that compulsive process that's just looking for a bigger hit, they end up leaning into sex is about intensity. And sex can be intense and it can be erotic. And I hope people have fabulous erotic sex lives out there. And I hope that at the core of it is intimacy. But when
mm.
something becomes compulsive and addictive, that idea of intimacy at its core of a sexual behavior usually gets lost.
Yeah. I see that in a lot of times in the songs that are out there, where sex has been confused with love when they just it's viewed as interchangeable, where it's like tonight we're gonna be in love and then tomorrow I'm out, these are lyrics, it's like, well, that doesn't sound intimate at all. Can you explain, the difference? A lot of times this is the thing that it was strange to me, but even as an adult, I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Uh, what is intimacy?
Well, let me just back up to what you said, and I'll say, being somebody in recovery and somebody working in this field, man, it makes it a little bit harder to just lean into music and just enjoy
Yeah,
it.
yeah. There are things I was like, I can't dance with my wife with this. You know what I mean? Like, whoa, wait a minute, stop. Once I started understanding, you're like, no, I can't do that. No, no.
Oh. No, it's there's a song. I one of my hobbies, I play in a band, and one of the guys has this song he likes. It's been a country song that's been around forever, and he's playing it, and I'm like, oh, this is completely about some guy going around and sleeping with all of his ex-girlfriends and his friends' wives and stuff. And he's like, it is? I'm like, yeah, it's just difficult. But
Yeah,
but it does. It's the missing the connection between what intimacy is.
right.
When when as an adolescent and a teenager, the primary focus that you learn about sex is from pornography. It's about the behavior, it's about the visuals, it's about the intensity, it's about all of those kind of things. And oftentimes, people who are sex addicts have underneath their core a trauma of some piece, whether that's overt abusive trauma or whether that's like more of a covert relational, I just never felt comfortable in my own skin kind of trauma.
Right.
And sex is one of those behaviors, like food, like drugs, like gambling, that sort of takes the edge off and says, oh, it feels a little bit more comfortable.
Mhm.
And so there's two things that happen there. One, you get hyper focused on the intensity of the behavior because that's what you're exposed to with pornography.
Mm.
And then two, when you have that wounding at your core that doesn't feel quite comfortable, you end up using sexual behaviors or other addictive behaviors as a way to sort of patch that over.
Mm.
One of the things that, in my opinion, healthy sexuality has to start with, it has to start with my own intimate relationship with myself. If I'm not comfortable in my own skin, if my trauma has gotten in the way and I've been using something else to numb that out and not feel it, I'm not leaning in to intimacy with myself. I'm
Mm.
leaning into intensity to avoid the fact that I don't have intimacy with myself.
Wow.
And so if I don't have intimacy with myself, I really can't give that to somebody else. And so rather than being solid in my own skin, connected to my own intimacy, connected to my own sense of sexuality, and then leaning in and being able to share that without strings with another person. And when I say without strings, meaning I'm not using them and our sexual time together to make me feel better.
Right.
I'm already in my own space of feeling enough and connected with my own sexuality, and I can lean in, and they can share that moment with me, and I don't need to use them to feel okay.
Wow.
And when they're solid and I'm solid, and we share this amazing sexual experience, whether it is, you know, a more standard, uh, in the bedroom kind of sexual experience, or whether it's something that's got more eroticism to it, it doesn't really matter to me. If you're
Mm.
starting with two people who are connected and intimate with themselves and are coming from their own place of their own sexuality, that's an intimate experience.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
it's not about it needs to be more intense. It's not about it has to be the bigger orgasm or we have to orgasm together or all those things are nice and lovely and we can aim for those, but they're not the be all end all.
Yep.
They're they're the after effects from being connected and intimate and present. And that has to start with ourselves, which is why when we're doing work with addicts, we want to get them sober and stable and solid, but eventually we usually have to go in and do the trauma work to get all that stuff out of the way so
Mhm.
that they can develop and heal their relationship with themselves so that they can show up in relationship, whether that's a married relationship, a dating relationship, an intimate relationship, or a sexual relationship, where they
Right.
can show up truly as their whole connected self to share that moment of intimacy with the other person.
Wow. Listen, I was 20 years into my marriage and, didn't realize that, you know, for one, as a kid, my father was an alcoholic. My mother was addicted to religion. We were in what I would call a cult for a little while,
Yeah,
because it was when you give up full responsibility of your life to a church, that's pretty much the definition of a cult. And these were ways, I used pornography to deal with the stress. And let me tell you, it was an escape that I felt I needed.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, just whatever addiction people get under or have the are fighting with, there's a time it actually helped you, which is really strange. There's a time when it got you through so you could survive, you
Well,
know?
all addictive processes start out as coping skills.
Right.
I'm trying to not be overwhelmed emotionally
Yeah.
by whatever situation is around me. And I find that sexual behavior, drinking, and, take our adrenaline junkies, going out and doing something that's got a lot of hit to it, helps me to be able to cope and not be overwhelmed. The problem isn't that it was effective in helping us to survive that particular situation.
Mhm.
The problem is that the way addictions work is when you do them repeatedly and they get wired into your brain, it stops being a coping pattern for a situation and it starts to become a lifetime pattern. And when things become lifetime patterns, they usually become problematic.
I got my good friend Steven Tyler told me, he said, "Hey man, drugs helped me until they didn't."
Yeah,
I was like, that was like the essence of what I was like, wow, he was like, it got me through a whole lot. And then all of a sudden, it did not,
yeah,
and now it's hurting me. What are the questions we could ask ourselves, because that's really one of the things that I think that people out there right now, even listening to us talk right now, are just going to go, is this me?
yeah,
Really? I don't know. What is it? Can you give maybe three questions that you would think
yeah,
that could help someone do a small self-diagnosis for a little bit to know if they need more help?
yeah. Is my life in crisis because of my sexual behavior? And that might be that my relationship is exploding, my partner is upset or angry. It could be any number of things.
Mm,
The most of the arguments that my partner and I have center around sex.
mm,
But is my life in crisis because of my sexual behavior? Um, does my sexual behavior feel good, or do I feel depressed? Do I feel ashamed? Do I feel icky? Does something
mm.
after my sexual behavior, does something feel ugh? Um, and the other one, um, the last one, let me think about that.
That's
Those are two big ones. I mean, the
Oh,
other
those are two big ones.
those are two big ones. Yeah. Is sex causing problems in my life?
Yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, am I preoccupied with it?
yeah. One thing you know, because I remember doing a couple podcasts and was talking to people, and they were like, it's not a problem, and me and my girl do it together, and all this thing, but the question I had for them is basically, what if she asked you to stop?
Yeah.
And that was never and it's funny because the eyebrows go up and they're a little bit like, why
Yeah.
would she? I said, well, you
Yeah.
know, could you stop if she said, I don't want to do that anymore?
Yeah.
And quite, I mean, the answer for a lot of the people, a lot of men I know is no.
Yeah. Well,
They would just find someone else that would let them continue.
that's another one of those questions that they can ask themselves.
Yeah.
Am I keeping sexual secrets from
Mm,
my partner? You
mm,
know, maybe, it might be fine. You and your partner have this understanding that you watch porn. Okay. Does your partner know how much porn you're watching? And I'm not saying that you check in, hey, I'm going to sit down and watch porn and I'll let you know when I'm done. I'm not
yeah.
saying, but if you're watching porn 2 or 3 times a week, is your partner aware that, 2 or 3 times a week you're watching porn?
Hmm.
If you're watching porn, does your partner know sort of generally, sort of the genres that you're watching? Or are you telling your partner, giving your partner the impression that you're looking at one type of pornography, when in actuality, you're going into other ones.
Hmm.
When it comes to sexual behaviors, is your partner aware of kind of what you're doing? Are
Hmm.
you within the unspoken agreements of your marriage? And if your partner found out something that you were doing, would they say, "Huh, yeah, no, that's kind of in the general spirit of what we thought we were doing. That's
Right.
within our understanding." Or would they feel like, no, that's not at all what we kind of had in mind.
Hmm.
And so there's that piece of, yeah, are you keeping secrets here?
Mm.
Are you, does it feel good or does it feel icky? Does it feel like it's out of control? And has it created other problems?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. This is deep. In the spirit of the internet, right now, a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, maybe a little longer than that, but there was a really viral moment where at a major concert,
Oh, yeah.
they had the kiss cam, and two people were put under kiss cam, and they ran and they hid, and even the band started to suspect maybe this is an affair, and slowly but surely everyone started to find out that it was.
Yeah.
When I look at this, it's almost a metaphor for what I would call sexual addiction in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, because the moment before that kiss cam hit them, they probably felt they were the most successful people they knew,
Hmm.
and that everything was fine. To the fact that you were in a public area, it wasn't as if they were by themselves, whatever, but there were other people all around them and the whole thing. But it's almost like when you put the light, now your spouse knows
Yeah.
that you are in the arms of another person. And all of a sudden, you could see how wrong it is. And I'm sure the reason you run and hide is because you know how wrong it is.
Yeah.
Um,
And we live in an age where the technology for that to happen, and a part of me feels sad. I mean, I am in
no,
no,
I'm very sad with it, man.
I'm in no way going to say going and having an affair is ever a good idea or is ever anything that I'm going to condone. I don't think it is.
Right,
At the same time, we are in an age of technology where you can be uh, outed, where the privacy of what used to happen, no more, no
right,
more. The
right,
the people behaving badly and having it be anonymous for the rest of their life is not going to happen. And also, and this is what I think I'm most sad about, we live in an age where somebody chose to post that online knowing that it would. Now, those two people made a choice to be in an affair, and
right,
so it's going to impact them.
right.
But somebody chose to put it online knowing that it was going to impact on a minimum national level, but
Yep,
I think also international level.
yep,
Not only those people, but their families that had no choice in the matter.
yep, yep.
And Um, and
Devastating.
and we just have to be aware. I mean, one of the things that we talk about in recovery is, if people saw what you did in private, would you feel okay about that?
Well, see, that's why I even brought them up. I didn't want to name them. I didn't want to add more fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
What I brought, why I brought that up was because that's how it happened to me.
Yeah.
It was like the light. Once the light shone on what I was doing, and it was like it was plainly evident that it wasn't right. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like it was, but the minute before that, I had all kinds of justifications, as to why this was okay, what was going on, and I had put it in my head where I
Yeah.
had the whole story that it's fine, and what she doesn't know won't hurt her,
Yep.
um, until it hurts her.
And that is such a common pattern because, like I was talking about before with the trauma wounds,
Mm.
What you have to understand is that when my trauma wound gets triggered and my brain says, I need to go do this sexual behavior in order to not be overwhelmed, my brain functioning changes. Where my trauma brain says, this is what we're going to do to not be overwhelmed. And my frontal lobe, which is my executive functioning, goes into rationalization mode.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's well, it's not really masturbation if I'm not using my hand or if I'm not having an orgasm. It's not sex and oral sex isn't really sex. This isn't really a problem because of these reasons. And our brain convinces us of all that stuff.
Yep.
And it's not just that it's not we're unintelligent. It's not we're not moral. It's neurologically our brain is literally wired to justify what our survival brain wants to do to survive
Right.
in that moment. And we will, you know, it's like I thought it was okay because of this,
Yep.
you know.
Yep.
Later on when we get, more grounded and we start to get into sobriety, we look back at that, we're like, oh, that was pretty crazy thinking I had there. I don't know how I ever thought that.
Believe you me, it took me a long time, and all of a sudden I was like, what? Once you're out, kind of out and looking back and connecting dots, you're just going,
Yeah,
whoa, how did I get here? Those questions. I have a formula that over the years, over my 15 years in therapy, you know, because this is the thing, we are very intelligent people.
yeah,
But intelligence is not enough. You know, the way I like the formula I have is principle plus knowledge and reason equal wisdom.
yeah.
When you have those three things, because, when you have knowledge, that's intelligence, you know, but you have to have the principle and you have to have the reasoning behind it as well. You know what I mean? One thing is if you just have reason and knowledge, you could justify killing somebody.
Oh yeah.
But the principle is maybe you shouldn't kill other people.
And let
You
me
know what
let
I mean?
me
Like,
let me add a fourth point to that.
oh, go ahead, please,
What
please.
I've learned is like I love that reason. What was it? It's
It's a principle, knowledge, and reason.
principle, knowledge, and reason, and peers.
Ooh, yeah.
Because I will tell you that I have worked with so many people in our own brain. Intelligence can work wonders to justify whatever we want to justify, even when we hold on to those things. And
Mhm.
when and one of the things that's so important in recovery is you've got a recovery group of people, and that
Wow.
you're checking in with other people and you're asking them and you're letting them guide you and you're saying, "Hey, I'm thinking this, and I just want to check in to make sure that it's okay." I've been in recovery. I don't know how long I've been in recovery, almost 2 decades now.
Wow.
And been a long time. I
Mhm.
still make 2 phone calls almost every day to guys in recovery just to check in, just
Mhm.
to say, here's what's going on. Hey, here, this is on my radar. And sometimes it's like, I'm thinking this, just making sure that what I'm thinking actually makes sense.
Wow.
And again, put that in perspective. I work in this field. I'm in my own recovery. I teach people how to do this, and I am still making those phone calls. And my mentors that taught me how to do this are still making those phone calls too.
That's
And
right.
so there's this piece about, yeah, we need to understand the principles and we need to have reason and we need to have knowledge and we need to have all of that stuff. And we need other people to help us stay on track because it's way too easy for us to wander.
You know, that's a great, great point you just brought up, because one thing I realized, just in my 57 years is that success is not an accident,
Yeah.
but failure is not an accident either.
Oh, no.
You know, and you can't fly with the eagles if you're scratching with the turkeys, is
Yeah.
the phrase that I heard before. How do we recognize our circle? Because, like you said, there's a nice group of people that'll help you get there. But also, how can we recognize if we're in the wrong group?
Yeah. There's a nice group of people that will pull you down too.
Right, right. You know what I mean? Is there any clues or something it's wild because you have to almost define this because one thing we're always taught is to be loyal. You
Yep.
know, um, I learned, after I got famous that, you know, there were family members that I just couldn't talk to anymore.
Yep.
And people viewed that as sacrilegious. Wait, that's family. You never get rid of family. Well, I had to change all that thinking and realize and let everybody know, wait a minute, because if this family member still stayed around, they would take me with them.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if there's a magic answer on how to identify that. There
Mhm.
is something about who the people that I hung out, like alcoholics, when alcoholics get into 12 step, they will say you need to completely create a no, whole new social group. I don't know that that's true for every single person, but it's true for a lot of people. And there is a piece because as sex addicts, it's not uncommon that we're hanging out with other guys that are very much into pornography
Yeah.
and they may be, prostitution maybe or massage parlors may be something that they do, from time to time or maybe more often than time to time. And some of them, as we get into recovery, some of them might be really great when we say, you know what, those kind of images, don't include me on those text threads.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
hey, don't email me those links. And some guys or women or people will be really good at saying, you know what, you got it. That's not working for you. I can respect that. And okay, so given their behavior, I may not be hanging out with them like constantly, but I can still have a relationship with them if they're respecting what I'm trying to do and they're not trying to pull me back in.
Yep. Yep.
Other people aren't going to do that.
Yep.
And so the first question is, are they supporting the changes I'm trying to make, or are they telling me this is crazy? You can't be addicted to that. This is completely wrong. You're just being prudish. They got in your head and they're continuing to try to pull me back to where I used to be. It's kind of like the old, is that Al Pacino in The Godfather? They keep pulling me back in.
I did. Yes. Yes.
Um, so it's that, but there's also the piece that I hold on to, and I know in recovery, one of the skills that I developed, and I like to make most people figure this out. For me, it was just, oh, it's the idea that I can have different friends at different levels for different things. I can have
Right.
my party friends. I can have my closer friends that I have lunch with. I can have my really intimate friends that I share my struggles and what's going on with. And I can have different levels of friends. And
Mhm.
in recovery, it was one of those things of recognizing, okay. Well, some of these guys I've hung out with all over, they're really party friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they can do their own thing, and I can choose to lean into the connections and the friendships and the relationships that really reinforce what makes my life meaningful.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
recovery at its core is really a search for meaning.
Yep.
Addictive behaviors are in the moment pleasurable, but they never really provide meaning.
Yep.
And when we get into recovery and we put those behaviors back in the context that they were designed for as we've evolved over the years, when we put them back in that context and we open ourselves up to meaning coming from other aspects of how we live our life,
Hmm.
it, it,
Wow.
it's life changing. It's perspective changing. It's healing on a profound level.
It's wild. I s- I remember one of the things that I was started to do in my recovery was just write down my list of values, like
Oh
the
yeah.
things that I felt I valued more than anything. And what was so wild to me was that the things I was doing before never matched up to any of those values.
Yeah.
And that cognitive dissonance was it was stressful. And I realize that now, because you say you want this, you say this is what I want, but these actions are completely different. Um, and it created a really stressful life for me, you know?
Yeah, and I don't know that I would say this if you asked this of me tomorrow, but I'm going to say it today.
Okay.
I think that living by your values is the single most difficult aspect of recovery. I mean, getting sober, managing those addictive urges, using the tools, sort of walking that path of not going off the deep end into a relapse. That's hard.
Right, right.
But I think actually the single most difficult thing of recovery is this is my value. And this is how I'm going to choose to live my life. And I'm going to follow this value. And when we have a culture that gives us the
Yeah.
easy answer, the answer that, maybe puts us out in front of people in a way that we're excited about, or it gives us a monetary reward, or it gives us whatever kind of, fleeting moment of like ego burst,
Hmm.
but it doesn't match our values. And when we in recovery start to say, yeah, that'd be awesome, but it doesn't match my values. It
Hmm.
doesn't match and I'm not saying that these have to be highfalutin values. I mean, we talk about, do I have integrity? Am I rigorously honest? Am I, opening myself up to tolerance and resilience? I
Yeah.
mean, but when I'm taking the easy way out rather than being willing to say, let me make sure this aligns with my values, the principles I live my life by, and lean into that. There's a phrase out there I like somewhere that says, when we have values, 99% of our decisions have already been made for us.
Wow.
And being willing to follow our values on some of these decisions when they're uncomfortable,
Yep.
that's the most difficult part of recovery. And quite like you're experiencing, it's the most rewarding. It's the most life-changing part of recovery also.
I mean, when your actions align, every time it's a victory. It
Yeah.
feels like, whoo, there's an endorphin rush that comes with it, and I have to say that I said this when I went public with my addiction before. I said, I realized that people or human beings are not objects to be used, but they're people to be loved.
Yeah.
And it sunk really deep in my heart. Like, wait a minute. This activity uses people as objects, even my wife at times.
Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned this earlier, when you use people in order to medicate or what, it's like, but when you recognize the humanity and in everyone
Yeah.
and the love that people are geared and wired to accept and have and deserve. I mean, it starts to sound very, very Pollyanna, or even like people go, "Oh boy," but it's no, never more true.
Never more true.
It's these really basic things, because we all started out as babies that needed love, you know. And my thing is, when you look at this thing in its truest sense, uh, it's just about respecting and loving people for who they are and loving yourself,
Yeah.
because that's the, like, you can't give what you don't have. Um, so a lot of times we don't love ourselves because of guilt and shame. And I want to talk just like the final part of what I want to talk about today
Sure.
too is that guilt and shame cycle. That I think every person who's in recovery has experienced, where you're like, what's the use? You know, I didn't live up to a value. So why live up to any of them? You
Yeah.
know, talk to me. Do you have anything to say about those kind of things that people are dealing with every day? Maybe they saw something and they wanted to stop, because that's the thing too. You get people on the internet, they want to stop. They say, I don't want to do it anymore. And they go right back.
Yeah.
What do we say to people?
Well, there's a number of things. Addiction is not simple. There's trauma underneath it. There's the guilt and shame cycle that's often connected to the trauma, and there's the neurology of it.
Mm,
And so just healing the guilt and shame isn't enough. But you're right, guilt and shame is huge. And it's not just guilt and shame about what I'm doing now, it's guilt and shame about what I've done before.
Right.
Um, I'm always very grateful to Patrick Carnes. You know, he's the founder of Afar. And I had the good fortune of being able to work with him for a while. Um, and one of the things that he has said frequently is recovery is about living in the middle of paradoxes. And the one paradox that always comes to mind for me on the one side, which has to do with that guilt and shame, is as an addict in recovery, I will always be responsible for my past behaviors, my past actions, the impact that it had on me, the impact that my addiction and my behaviors had on other people. The responsibility for that will never go away no matter what I do moving forward. And I feel that. And so there's a weight, there's a responsibility that if I haven't done my healing work is going to lead into guilt and shame and it's going to pull me back into the spiral stuff because I'm never going to feel worthy of anything.
Mm,
You know, when my partner says, "Hey, I love you," if that's all I'm holding on to, it's going to be, "Yeah, but I did that.
mm,
I don't think you really mean it because I did that."
mm,
Or if I'm keeping it a secret, well, you wouldn't say that if you knew that I did that.
mm.
But the other side of that paradox is the hope side. It's I'm actively living my life in a different way. I am not the same person I was before. I am leaning into values. I'm leaning into principles. I'm leaning into recovery. I'm letting other people guide me and help me find a way through when my brain can't do it on its own. I am not the same person I was before, and don't judge me based on who I was before. And with that, it's so powerful because that's the healing and the change. But if that's all I lean into, that becomes that piece of whitewashing my past.
Right, right,
And
right.
so and like you were saying with the religious addiction, it's like with that, I just pray it away and we never have to talk about it ever again,
Wow.
you
Wow.
know? And so when we live our life in the middle of those paradoxes, when I can simultaneously hold accountability and responsibility for what I've done, and I can also hold on to I'm living my life in a different way. I'm a very different person than I was before. And I can hold them simultaneously, even though they're opposite.
Right,
And being in recovery isn't about one or the other is right. It's about they're both right. And I'm learning when to lean into accountability and responsibility and when to lean into I'm a different person and I'm living my life in a different way.
mm,
And neither of those means I'm canceling out the other. And when
yes.
I can hold both of those, guilt and shame go back into their purpose, which is not to tear me down and make me feel less than.
Mm,
Guilt and shame are there to help guide me on containing my behavior to match my values and to sort of understand that I'm no different or better than anybody else. I'm living my life in a different way, and guilt and shame can help keep me on that path when I can put them in their correct context.
right. Ooh, that's good. That's really, really good. You know, because you do have sides of thought that says, hey, all guilt and shame, you should never have it. You
No.
know,
And there are other sides that we lean into, and social media drives me nuts with this, which holds on to the idea that you will never be redeemed for what you've done in the past.
you're right. And you can't go either or. Yeah, I
Right.
love this. I love this. The paradox is real. The
Yeah,
paradox and holding that paradox.
exactly.
I think that's, man, Tim, this was great, man. Thank you so much. I
I, I love
I feel like we had a nice session today.
I love our recovery conversations, man. I'm so glad that we got to have one here today.
No, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. I think that a lot of people just, you know, because of the stigma, there's a
Yeah.
stigma, and it's hard for people to open up with these kind of conversations because people feel, oh, but I've always wanted to be, just that person who can, let's talk about this stuff. Let's really open it up. And I'm thankful to have your friendship and guidance, and it's awesome, man. Thank you so much, Tim.
Well, and I appreciate you because I mean, this is the point of it. I mean, we can do our own individual recovery, and some people aren't ready to put that out to the world. For a long time, and I still, with many people, I just sort of say, I don't advertise it, but I don't hide it. But at the same time, there is this really important piece of if nobody talks about their healing, if nobody talks about their struggles, if nobody talks about what comes on the other side of this,
Yeah.
other people out there can't benefit. And so I really appreciate that you have been willing to put yourself out here in this way because so many people know who you are. They hear your story. And I am convinced that there are a lot of people in recovery that wouldn't be because they were exposed to you and your own healing journey. So,
Mm.
thank you for your willingness to be known.
Thank you, Tim. There's so many people that said they felt all alone.
Yeah.
And then they said, and then you spoke up, and I was like, I'm not, it's not just me, you know, and it feels really, really good. Like, wow, if you can just help a small number of people or one person just say, wait a minute, you're not by yourself.
Well,
It's
and that
really
makes
cool.
sense. I mean, I assume that was true for you. It's like part of you felt like you were all alone. I know I
Totally.
felt like I was all alone, and then I found out one of my good friends was also struggling with this, which opened it up a little bit and made it possible to lean in and do some work in a different way. And now I have the honor of being somebody who can be a little bit of a beacon to some people and can help them find their way through this. But everybody starts feeling like they're all alone with this.
Mhm.
And I hope that they all hear what you're saying, what we're saying today, which is you're not alone. We're
Right.
here.
That's right. Thank you, Tim. It's good, man.